This is Townsquare Sunday, the story of a shipwrecked Japanese boy, Whitfield-Manjiro, being rescued by Captain William Whitfield of Fairhaven in the 1840s. It's really a story about friendship and two nations working together to preserve that friendship. We are also here to discuss the work of the Whitfield-Manjiro Friendship Society and their annual Japanese Cherry Blossom Festival on May 5th from 11 to 4. Society President Jerry Rooney is with us here today. Welcome, Jerry.
Well, thank you, and glad to be here.
All right. Jerry, give us the Cliff Notes version of the Whitfield and Manjiro story.
Oh, very quickly, as you said, in the 1840s, Captain William Whitfield rescued Manjiro and four of his friends from a deserted island in Japan and brought him back as to be the first Japanese person to live in USA. He lived at the captain's house. The other four stayed in Hawaii when they stopped there. So in any event, Manjiro came to his first school, which is the old Stone School on North Street here. And he went also to the Lewis Bartlett Academy to learn navigation, which allowed him then to go back and translate the Bowditch's American Navigator into Japanese and teach it. And finally, because of that, in 1860, the first Japanese ship could cross the Pacific to California. It's called the Conroe. So in that house now became a museum, thanks to the efforts of Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara, who was the president of Seidoka Byoin, which is St. Luke's Hospital in Tokyo, by the way. And he raised all the funds to repair it, dedicated it on May 7th in 2009. And we've been running it ever since with over 7,000 visitors so far.
How long did Manjiro live in Fairhaven?
Actually, he actually didn't live here all that long. And at that house, only a matter of months, because the captain bought a farm out in Sconticut Neck. He spent more time in Sconticut Neck, but he spent most time of his 11 years away from home on ships, because he went back to Japan after he was at the farmhouse on another voyage with a different captain, and that was a 3.5-year voyage. He thought he could get back into Japan, but it was a closed country. He couldn't, so he came back. That was a 3.5-year voyage, and then finally he heard about the gold rush. He wanted money to go home, went to California on another ship that took a trip. And after that, when he got enough money to go home, he had to take a ship back to Hawaii and then eventually home. So he spent a matter of just months on Cherry Street and probably in and out several years at the Sconticut Neck.
But he had enough knowledge and I think enough good feeling about the people of Fairhaven and Captain Whitfield to spread the story when he got back to Japan.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, He became the first teacher of English, by the way, in Japan. When he came to San Francisco, he bought dictionaries and American books and so forth, and he started teaching over there. And so he found it very, it was funny because only 3 days after he got home, he had to go into Kochi City, start teaching English to young samurai. Problem was, he'd never gone to school in Japan, had no titles. So they made him a samurai at very low level, they call it hatamoto. So now he had a title he could teach. And from there on, he taught everything he could, and very often had the tie back to the United States. In 1870, he was in New York on a ship going to Europe for a conference, and he was the interpreter. And he finally took the 2 days off, and he jumped on a train, came back to Fairhaven. It's the last time he saw the captain, 1870. And he eventually went back. Had a long life as a samurai and a teacher. He died at 71 years of age in Tokyo, and he's buried at Zoshigaya Cemetery there.
How did you become aware of the story and get involved?
Well, actually, I got to thank my wife, who, as you know, is Japanese. Yako came here to go to school at UMass Dartmouth, which was SMTI at the time, and decided instead of getting a degree and go home, she met up with me here in New Bedford, and she was part of the delegation that went in 1987 to Manjiro's hometown of Tosa Shimizu to sign the Sister City Agreement. She went as one of the interpreters. So she was part of the original committee. Later, they got me to jump on the committee, and they needed a vice president. They said, he doesn't do anything, don't worry. I became the vice president, and then Marion Mitchell, who you probably remember, was the president, got sickly, and then a vice president. And for 22 years, I've been the president.
Well, there you are. In a nutshell, Manjiro in Fairhaven and how he is remembered here. Now, and after signing that Sister City Agreement, that led to a kind of an elaborate effort to acquire Whitfield's former home on Cherry Street.
That's correct. I said it was bought initially by a lawyer from New York, Mr. Daniel Green, And he started to renovate it for the same purpose. However, he contracted some potentially fatal disease, had to put it back up for sale. And that's when Dr. Hinohara got involved. In Japan, he had a fundraising group of about 30 people, including Seiji Ozawa, the music leader, and they raised over $1 million, bought the house, the carriage house, the land, and renovated the house to make it a museum, which has been operating now since 2009 with over 7,000 visitors.
Okay, so that is now, so we've laid the backdrop, if you will, for the Cherry Blossom Festival, which is coming up on May 5th, that is, from 11 to 4. I should remind our listeners, this is Townsquare Sunday. I'm Jim Phillips. You're listening to Jerry Rooney, the president of the Whitfield-Manjiro Friendship Society. In 2009, there was a milestone day. Is that right?
Absolutely. That was the day of dedication, yes. If people want to go on our website, which is very basically www.whitfield-manjiro.org, go to the highlights tab and scroll down to Dr. Hinohara, about to unveil the sign in front of the building. You'll find a triangle there. It's a video, about 11 minutes. They'll see the whole day of dedication.
All right. It's but that was really when the museum, not when it opened, but the dedication.
That was the dedication, and from then on we've been running it, yes. Yeah.
There is a feeling in Fairhaven, maybe even more in Japan, about the whole Manjiro story. How do they look at it? We look at it, I think, as well as a great thing. Captain Whitfield found these people. He saved them. He brought Manjiro to Fairhaven. Manjiro lived here in Fairhaven for a brief period of time. But he went on to kind of tell the story of the friendship of the American captain and the American people, I would assume, to some degree. Mm-hmm. How does Japan look at this thing?
Well, one of the things that Manjiro was also involved in 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry, of our Navy, went into Tokyo, which was called Edo at the time, with what they call the black ships. They were coal burners, and asked the Tokugawa shogun, who was the military head, to reopen Japan. It had been closed for 200 years to outsiders, so that they could replenish the ships and so forth like that. And he said, I'll come back in 1 year for the answer. So during that year, the Tokugawa shogun was very shook up because none of his people knew anything about these crazy American foreigners, and he heard about Manjiro. So 6 days later, Manjiro was brought to Edo, the capital of Japan, and became part of what they call Jiki-san. He's kind of the shogun's emperor, samurai, the samurai for the shogun. At which time is the only time he was allowed to take a family name, because he was a peasant. His name was Manjiro. So he was allowed to take a family name, which he did from his hometown, a little village called Nakanohama, and so his name became Nakahama. So currently, the whole family name is Nakahama. Mm-hmm. So when Perry came back, he was assisting in the whole thing, and they finally opened 2 ports, Shimoda to the west, which turns out to be sister city to Newport, Rhode Island, because that's Commodore Perry's hometown, and Hakodate way up in Hokkaido, which is exactly the same latitude, 42 degrees, as we are.
Wow. Okay, so there you go. That is how. So they looked at this whole story as something more than just a chance encounter.
Right.
This was an act of friendship that shouldn't be forgotten.
Absolutely, and actually the 2 families, they're down to the 5th and 6th generations now, and they're still very much in touch. And even during the Second World War, very much concerned about each other's safety, et cetera, et cetera. And we understand there possibly was some letter exchanges through the Red Cross. But in any event, we know documentary-wise that they were very concerned about each other's safety.
Okay, now let's talk about the Cherry Blossom Festival that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Tell us about that. What is the connection? What is the Japanese-U.S. connection there?
Well, about a little over 100 years ago, the Japanese government sent cherry blossoms to Washington, D.C., hundreds and hundreds. They're all around the basin and so forth. And to commemorate that, and later on, the Americans sent dogwood back to Japan. So that became like a cultural, floral type of a relationship. And down in Washington, D.C., just this past weekend, they had their big cherry blossom festival, by the way, which my son, who runs a taiko Japanese drumming school, presents all of those things, and he's down there now doing it for that. And so from that, when the Dr. Hinohara heard about those cherry trees being donated down there in the 100th anniversary, he couldn't be outdone. He donated 17 cherry trees to the town of Fairhaven, 6 of which were along that little park at the bottom of Pilgrim Street. 2 of them made it, the others didn't, but the 2 that made it bloomed like crazy, and I just passed them. They're ready to bloom again this year, so his memory is still there for us. So that cherry blossom is a traditional Japanese, it's a kind of a laid-back thing in a way, but it involves, the cultural things of ikebana, which is flower arranging, origami, paper folding, and we do all of those things with the people that come. And we also present a bento box, which is a segregated lunch box that's very typical in Japan where the kids go to school, in little segments and so forth, and we get them locally, and those are also available on that day.
All right. So there'll be tours available? There was a cost.
Tours of the house, right? Exactly. Tours of the house. There'll be displays of kimonos and other things like that. We will have, as I said, ikebana done. Also, the Japanese taiko drumming, a group that's been there before called Shindaiko, very dynamic. We hold them for near the end of the day at about 3:30, and get a nice crowd for them. By the way, it'll be done directly at the museum itself. The streets will be blocked off, and we'll be using the neighbor's backyard as well as our backyard in there to actually accommodate all the booths that we'll have. The neighbor's house was also part of Captain William Whitfield's family house as well, so was part of it in the old days.
So was there a cost for admission or anything?
Not for admission. If someone is interested in the bento box lunch, that's a very special kind of thing. For adults, it's $20. For the children under 12, it's $10. We need to know that ahead of time. We have the tickets ready now. People can reserve and pick it up at the door kind of thing if they wish. But in all of the posters and notices we have, they have the contact information is there.
Okay, so we're going to have you repeat that before you go.
Sure.
But there'll be some. You mentioned the drumming. There'll be some traditional
martial arts as well.
Yeah.
A couple of different kinds of martial arts. There will be some of our local. We'll have some of our local school kids doing a little sing along with the thing. We'll have an opening ceremony at which we'll ask. We've invited the mayor of New Bedford, of course, the selectmen of also Bill Strauss, Mark Montigny, and so forth. And we'll have a little opening ceremony at 12 noon, which will also be rendered by the Consulate General from Boston. We'll be sending a person down to represent them.
And any money raised, that goes right back into the museum?
Right back in, yes. Because
imagine that building is it 150 years old? More than that?
Yeah, at least that, yes. Yeah. And it's a 3-story, because when Manjiro was there, it was only 2 stories high. And after we went back in 1852, the captain had the house raised and put a new first floor under it and put addition on the back. So now we have, and Dr. Hinohara at the dedication signed the deed and gave it all to the town of Fairhaven. They own all of that property on the condition our nonprofit would operate it, which we've been doing. But you probably remember the original days of our nonprofit. We used to meet in the library, and our whole office was a file cabinet downstairs. Yeah. And now we have a 3-story house, which we have to keep up with the utilities and all the rest of it. So it's a real challenge.
All right, May 5th, 11 to 4,
right,
on Cherry Street in Fairhaven at
Correct.
The Manjiro, the Whitfield-Manjiro home. What makes this venture so special for you?
For me, it's very special because I have now a permanent connection with Japan, meaning my wife, and of course our family and her family there. In my younger days, when I was able to, after 5 years in the Air Force flying over Europe, never landing, I went around the world on a motor scooter for 3.5 years. Ended up, the last country I went to, 31 countries, was Japan. And while in Japan, people were fantastic to me. They were around the world, but Japan was incredible. I was there 162 days. Of those days, 141 days in private homes of new friends.
Wow.
So did I love Japan, and I met my wife in New Bedford.
Where can people go to learn more about the festival on May 5th?
Well, you can go to our website, which is www.whitfield-Manjiro. Manjiro is spelled MANJIRO.org, O-R-G. And there you can look under the program tab, and they'll see all the information about the Ohanami. Ohanami is the name, by the way, of the Cherry Blossom Festival.
You have another festival in the fall, right? The Manjiro
That is
Festival?
correct. We'll be having our 17th Manjiro Festival. It alternates between here and Japan, his hometown. Last November, we were there for their festival, and this year they'll be coming again here. 2 years ago, they had about 40 people came with the mayor.
Town Hall Square, that's where that's held.
That is
in
actually at
October?
Town Hall Square. Yeah, yeah. So a lot more about that later, October 5th.
Sure. My guest is Jerry Rooney, the president of the Whitfield-Manjiro Friendship Society. Thank you very much, Jerry.
My pleasure. And thank you
Talking
for
to you.
the opportunity. And we invite everyone to come and share a beautiful location and I think, a very important story.
Town Square Sunday returns in just one moment.